These images were taken on an early morning of this past December in the neighborhood of this village in Manhattan, New York City. The fire started in a corner building on 2nd Avenue, which was empty and had been empty for a few months. The reason why being because it was old and it needed fixing, so nobody was really living in there. In any case, nobody got hurt. The problem is that the church next to it quickly got fire as well. And the result you can see in these images. The fire department took 8 hours to turn off that fire. The residential corner building was completely destroyed, and unfortunately the church next to it was also almost completely destroyed. Now, when I got the news that day, I was a bit shocked because that church is one of those pretty buildings that really stand out or stood out in the neighborhood. It's a neo-Gothic church that was 128 years old. 128 years old is very old for a city like New York. So my very first thought went immediately to the historic and artistic value of that building in the neighborhood and in Manhattan in general. This city is so new, it's so recent, and Americans, at least so I believe, are trying to build a history, a cultural, artistic, and architectural patrimony here. And that church was certainly a part of that potential patrimony. Do you say patrimony? That might be the wrong word. In the days after, though, while talking to people, I quickly realized that the public opinion wasn't so much interested at the church. They were rather talking about the building next to the church. And especially the issue was to understand why the fire happened. The gossip was that the owner of that building started the fire on purpose to be able to not pay the demolition of the building, which in the middle of the city is very expensive, and to get the money from the fire insurance. The investigations, as far as I know, haven't proved anything, so this is just really the gossip around the neighborhood, nothing else. But people were talking about it a lot. So I decided to go myself in front of the building. So I went there after the fire was extinguished, and as you can see, there were quite a bit of people just contemplating the disaster. So I started talking with some of them just to get a little bit of the general opinion, the general vibe. And I even asked specifically, do you think people care more about the destruction of the church or the fire to the building? And most of the people, I must say, answered the case of the fire to the building rather than the destruction of the church. Now, being European, I'm sure that all Europeans listening to this story will feel the same way that I do. The real tragedy there was the destruction of one of the pretty rare historic buildings of the city, which used to contain quite a few art pieces, old art pieces, which got obviously completely destroyed. This is such a new city. It was colonized 4 centuries ago. So a building that has been standing there for 100 or 200 years is really considered old here. And again, my conservative European mentality was thinking, wow, is it possible that nobody talks about the tragedy of losing such an important architecture for the history of the neighborhood, of the island even? Do you really not care at all about building a history of architecture? Architecture, I'm convinced that is the art that is most important in the history of any population, and that it was even allowed, ethically allowed to some people to set fire to the building next to it. These were my thoughts until members of the community of the church started arriving, so I got the chance to talk with the people who were actually using that building. And that's when I got a completely new perspective. I saw the whole event under another light, and I decided to share my thoughts with you. I discovered that the Middle Collegiate Church was home to a very numerous community, a community that is very, very active, not only in between them, but they are also political activists. It's a very inclusive church. Many gay people and transgender people are part of the community. Many Black people too. They have been active participants of the BLM movements this summer, and they keep being active in that movement. And really the vibe of that congregation is to be as much inclusive as possible. So while talking to these people, I started realizing that of course, they were sorry for the arts that were in the building and for the architectural and historical value that the building had, but most importantly, they were devastated because their house, their community house, got destroyed. They didn't have a place where to meet anymore, especially during COVID times. That was horrible, especially it was right before Christmas, so even worse. And I immediately compared this view of the church to the general European view of the church. I would say Italian because I know it better. And I realized how we tend to consider churches more as monuments and almost dead museums, pieces of museums, dead things that stay there, and they also have a real life function, but their primary function is to be there as monuments of history, reminders of our past. Whereas here, I found it so interesting and beautiful that a building, despite its value otherwise, was primarily used in the present to do human activities that are bringing people together in a community. So do you understand the difference here of the two mentalities? These American people didn't care so much about the monumental value of the church. They cared about the fact that this big community of people who rely on the community to live a better life, to find support, to find love simply, they didn't have a place to gather together anymore. They didn't have that reference point in the city where they could go when they find themselves in a moment of need, for example. And so in the very end, I don't really have an opinion that is leaning towards one of the two sides. I just think that both situations have to learn from each other. First of all, I wish to see in Europe more situations like this where the buildings are not just standing there as reminders of the past, but they are also used to build the present and build the future. I would like them to see utilized. And I believe that in Europe in general, we have way too many old buildings that are standing there empty. On the other side, I also have some doubts about how New Yorkers are managing their architectures, because my very humble impression is that they haven't really understood how important it is to have an architectural heritage if they want to build a history for their country. In this city, which is one of the most important cities in the whole country, probably the most important one historically, it's not possible that every building that I see, every major building that I see is super modern, super recent, super new. And don't get me wrong, I really appreciate that they are able to destroy the old and build something new, which is an ability that we Europeans don't really have as a general thing. Of course, there are some parts of Europe where they are very good at building new architectures, but I come from Italy. Italy is very bad at that. We are just living in old buildings. And to be honest, I also, as an Italian, I haven't found a solution for preserving our historical architecture heritage and at the same time being able to move on with new architectures, with new history. But at the same time, I really think that the way to go is not to just not care about the older buildings and destroy them and build something new, as if nothing bad happened, you know? So again, this is just a little bit of food for thoughts for you. I don't really have an answer to this problem, to this problematic. I just wanted really to raise a question, because I think it's always good to raise questions and to keep questioning everything, not giving anything for granted. Of course, I'm very eager to know now what my European friends, American friends, and especially the ones that are neither think about this matter, and what are your opinions? If you have any opinions, what are your doubts? What are your fears? What are your focus points? So let's discuss about it in the comments, and I'll see you next Sunday.